I'm Kershner. I teach bassoon here at Central Connecticut State University, and today I'll be talking to you about the etudes for bassoon for this year's region audition. I'll make some preliminary comments, which I always make regardless of what the music would be to get us started. First thing to remember when you go into these auditions is what the judges are listening for. You don't have to play what you play note perfect for them. They're going to expect a few missed notes or mistakes. But your goal should be to make the best possible sound you can make, miss the fewest notes, of course, that you can miss. Approximate the correct tempo. Don't play it so slowly that it would be not even the same piece. But also don't go past the fastest tempo that you can manage. And play with the best intonation that you can play with. Now, some things about getting you to those points. The biggest problem that I find with young students is that the equipment that they're playing on is not good. It's inferior in various ways. Bassoons are very expensive, and if everybody could afford to have a professional quality instrument, there would be no problems, but that's just not practical. So whatever bassoon that you play, whether it's your own instrument or whether it belongs to the school that you go to, try to get that instrument in the best possible playing condition that you can. I would do this by taking it to someone who is a bassoon repairman. Not hard to find these. You can look online, look in the area, and there are a couple that are close by. If you take it to a music store where they fix all sorts of instruments, the instrument can actually come back worse than when you took it in because they don't really know what they're doing because the bassoon is complicated and unusual. So that's the first point. So your bassoon that will seal and all the notes will speak when you try to make them play and so forth. Secondly, a reed that will respond and play in reasonable fashion. I can't tell you how many times I've heard auditions like this and people come in and they're playing on reeds that I couldn't play on, nobody could play on, and yet they're trying to use them. So try to get with someone to help you, a bassoonist in the area. All of us who teach at universities would be more than glad to meet with you once or a couple of times to try to get you on the right track with reeds and the approach to these etudes. So reeds these days, in this current time we live, it's so much easier than when I was a student your age. It was difficult to find good reeds then. You had to mail order them, and it took a long time. Nowadays, all you have to do is go online and you'll get hundreds of hits when you just type in bassoon reeds. And again, they're not cheap, but you can get a usable bassoon reed for something like $12 or $15. You should order about 3 of them, minimum, because probably one of the 3 will work well enough for you to actually use. One other basic tip, soak the reed in warm, not hot, but warm tap water for about a minute before you try to play it. If the tip is extremely open, take your thumb and first finger and slide out from the first wire and hold that closed for about 8 to 10 seconds, and it will get the tip back to the condition and position that it should have been in so that it will play for you. If the tip of a reed is really, really wide open, it won't respond. You'll blow into it and you'll think, oh, this reed's too hard. It's not too hard, it's just too open. So this is some basic tips. I mean, there's so much to say about reeds and we can't cover all that here, but it is critical that what you're playing on will actually work. Otherwise, you can't overcome that obstacle. Let's go to the music now. There's less to say about these etudes this year just because of the nature of them. And I have to say, if I were choosing these etudes, I wouldn't have chosen them. But I wasn't choosing them, and we're not asked to assist in this. We'd all like to, but for some reason they don't take our advice, and so we have these pieces. We have to use what they tell us they're going to use. Anyway, we have what we have. These are from the 30 classical studies for bassoon, and they're classical etudes, and so they're very one-dimensional. They don't show very many aspects of your playing. For example, there are, I don't think, any dynamics. No dynamics anywhere in the music. So, do what you like. Produce a healthy tone, and if you'd like to make a little bit of a change in the sound, volume at some point, for musical reasons, go ahead, because there's nothing to tell you what to do. So you're totally free in that sense. You want to make a big sound, and the best sound that you can produce at all times. Some of these variations that are involved here are kind of notey. They have a lot of fast notes in them. Well, it doesn't matter. When you're playing those fast pieces, think of everything you're playing as a tone exercise. I'll talk a little bit about practicing them as I go through each one. The piece is organized in a very typical way for this time period, which is there's a basic theme. It's a minuet movement, and then it has 3 variations, and you're supposed to play all of these. Now, the minuet, remember, is not a slow piece, nor is it a fast piece, but it's in 3. It shouldn't be so fast that it breaks into 1 to the bar. It was typically the 3rd movement of a symphony during this time, so that's basically the kind of piece you're playing. It's a dance movement. Now, the editor gives you, this is Bill Waterhouse, edited all of these, who was a very eminent bassoonist of his day, passed away just a few years ago. But he put this together, and he put a metronome marking in here, parenthetically, of a quarter at 104. It's okay, it'll work at 104. Problem is, when you get over to the last variation, which has a lot of big leaps, you're going to have to knock the tempo down a little bit. I think the tempos that I played it at are what I would recommend that you do. So I played the theme and the first 2 variations at about a quarter at 96. And I think that's a pretty workable tempo. It just takes the edge off of his 104 speed. Practice it with a metronome just to get used to it, then turn the metronome off in this theme. There's no need to have that on while you're playing the little melody. The theme is pretty simple. Now, he puts breath marks in here, And you know, they're little V's, that's what that means. These are good breath marks. This thing breaks up into 4-measure phrases. You can take a breath there. If sometimes you don't think you need one of these breaths, then don't take it. But you shouldn't need any more breaths than that. I think the only thing to really mention about the minuet itself are the ornaments which occur at the end of the first and second line. It's kind of busy in that sense, and they have grace notes and trills and things. You'll notice in my performance that in measure 7, and you should mark all your measure numbers in your music so you can follow along with what I'm saying here. In measure 7, just before the end of the first line, there's a trill on the B natural. Start this trill from the upper note C, and then close the trill with 2 grace notes, A and B, and then that takes you to the last measure, which has some other stuff to do. It has a little grace note B, which you'll play on the beat, and then go up to the D, and then close it with the 2 grace notes that lead you to the final beat C. You'll hear it on the recording. You'll do exactly the same thing in the second line. The only difference is you're back to the key of F major here. As the piece is typical, this time it starts in F, and by the time you get to the end of the first line, it's modulated to C, which is the dominant. Then you're starting there, and you work your way back around the circle and end up on F at the end of the piece. The other grace notes are pretty basic. The one that occurs in measure 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, the little B on the third beat, play that ahead of the beat. So dum dum tia dum dum. The other ones are a double grace, which occur in measure 9, 10, 11, 12. Da dee da dum, just before the third beat. Very melodic and very singing quality to this. Use some vibrato if you have developed any, and produce a nice sound. Now you're going to go on to the first of the variations, which follows that. This should be at roughly the same tempo, because it was the standard practice at this time to keep everything in the same speed in the theme and variation. So basically you shouldn't alter it very much. Very bad thing to do, for example, would be to take a nice fast tempo in the theme, and then when you get to the variation 1, because it's got more notes in it, you slow it way down. Don't do that. Instead, modify your first tempo to match what you can do in the harder sections. So it may mean that the minuet's a little on the slow side, but you got to match it to what you can handle in the triplets and the 16ths which follow. Now, variation 1, not terribly difficult. It fits the instrument very well. It doesn't have any real challenges. There are no places in here where you need to resort to any kind of fake fingerings or what we call cheat fingerings. Just use the standard fingerings for the instrument that you have learned. And I'm not going to try to give you new fingerings, except to say use the ones that you were taught and don't leave things out. One example would be the pinky key on the left hand, which you should use on G and all the high notes from E and on the rest of the way up. Don't leave it out. Use it because it will keep the note from being too sharp, and it will help the pitch on all those notes. Now, breathing in variation 1. Not a very big problem. It doesn't put a breath in this at the end of the first phrase. You could take one. You could take one at the end of measure 4 if you need it. And then you'll breathe at the end of the first section, and then you would take the repeat. And you go through the same thing again. In the audition, my experience in doing these is that, both in this state and others, is that they're not going to hear everything, and they're certainly not going to hear all the repeats. But you know what? You should practice it as if you're going to have to, because there's no way to guarantee anything. You might have some judge that thinks, oh, let's see if they have some endurance. I'm going to hear all the repeats in variation 1. Well, if you didn't practice it that way, you're going to be uncomfortable. So you prepare for the worst and hope for the best in terms of what they ask for. When you do this one, you'll end of the first section in measure 8. You have a double bar, and you've done the repeat. Then you start the section at measure 9. Here would be a place, for example, where you could drop the dynamic a little bit, maybe to a little quieter. It doesn't say so, but it would make a little more musical presentation. When you get to the last phrase, which starts in measure 13, there's a breath before it. Do not hurry this breath. If you do, you'll miss the low F in measure 13. And that's because it's a big jump, it's a low note, a lot of the instruments being engaged. If you don't seal all the holes, the F won't come out. So take your time, take a full breath. If you have to add a half a beat or a beat, do so. And then go to the end of that section. One general word about breathing for you. When you're younger, depending on your physical size, you'll be able to play varying lengths of phrases on a breath. Your lungs are simply not fully developed and large enough as they would be if you were a mature adult. So take the breaths that you need. You can't play a wind instrument without wind. And you better have air rather than, don't be a dead hero and try to play with no air. It won't sound good. You finish variation 1. If they ask you to continue to variation 2, take a couple beats. Don't worry about it. They're not going to be disturbed by that. If you jump right into it, you're going to get winded, you're going to hyperventilate, and you're going to be uncomfortable. So take a couple beats before you start variation 2. Variation 2 is no more difficult, I guess, than variation 1. It has 16th notes in it. Anything that's at all fast, remember the basic rule is to start by practicing it slow. If you want to play something fast, first practice it slow. And not just 1 or 2 times. I'm talking about for days you want to keep it slow. Another thing to do, and this will go against what maybe you've been told, I'll just give you my own take on it. It used to be that people would say, start with a metronome speed of, I don't know, some slow tempo, like 52 to the quarter, and then gradually speed up the metronome. I learned over the years that this is bad advice in a way, because people start speeding up the metronome too soon. What is the slow practice for? It's to teach your fingers the muscle memory that they need in order to be able to play the patterns that are found in this music. So keep it slow and don't try to go fast before you're ready. Once you have practiced it slow, though, it's also sort of misinformation that you may have been told that you don't need to practice it fast. You do. Just because you have played it slow doesn't mean you can play it fast. And so if you've ever, in sports you notice this, if you ever play golf, if you take a half swing, you can get pretty good at that. Half swing, you approach the ball, and the nice and square hit. Then you take a full swing, and it's a very different ball game. Well, it's the same thing with music. You got to practice at the fast tempo too, maybe in short bursts, not the whole thing, in other words, but 2 or 4 measures, and gradually build that up. Now, the last variation, variation 3, which he calls the finale, he marks the tempo down to 96. If you took my advice and did 96 for the first 3 sections, I would drop this one to about 90. So a quarter at 90 for the variation 3. And this one has a repeat of the first section. Okay, we'll take that. But then the second section is just one shot, and you'll be very thankful that it is, because it's also the hardest section. So if you get through from measure 8 to the end once, you'll be more than pleased with yourself. There's a lot of things going on. The problem with this variation and the difficulty of it are the leaps that are involved. I always tell my students, don't try to play the next note until you play the one you're on. Sounds real simple, but for instance, in the very first measure, you play a low F, and then you play the A, and then you have to jump an octave down to the low A. Don't worry about the low A until you play the upper A. Now, I was talking about using standard fingerings through this. All of these upper notes, or most of them, will need to be flicked. And if you don't know what that is, ask your teacher about it. You'll open one of the keys with the left hand on the right side of the upper part of the instrument. You will open that with your thumb. I'll just pick up my bassoon and show you. We're talking about these keys right here. So for most of the notes, you can flick with the C key. Some people flick the A with the A key here. You can do that, and then use this one for B flat, B, and C. If you have a D key, which is this upper one, you use that for D. But these are the 3 keys that we use for so-called flicking. This, of course, is the whisper key. When you're playing this variation, you're going to need to get to the flick key and then back to the whisper key very quickly. And people say, how do you do that? And what I tell them is, well, I just do. And you can do it too if you practice it enough and you practice it slow enough. Your thumb will just get used to that. We play 9 keys with our left thumb. That's just the way the instrument is. So don't leave anything out. Don't try to play the low notes without the whisper key because they will not come out. The worst place for it, of course, is down in the last 2 lines where you have these constant leaps. And if you have to pull the tempo back a click or two to play it properly and get most of the notes, I would do that. And don't try to play it faster than you can and have just a smear through it where most of it's not coming out. Believe me, they want to hear all the notes and they want to hear a nice sound all the time. So these are the pieces. As I say, they're kind of one-dimensional. They're meant to really show just a couple of things in your playing, but make sure that you show those things. A good sound, good intonation, well-practiced technique. And if you have any issues with these and you need some help, please feel free to contact me at CCSU. Just go to the department website and you'll see my email address there, and I'll be happy to offer you any assistance that I can. I wish you the best of luck with the auditions. Practice your scales and your arpeggios, which are required as well. And good luck, and I hope you do well.